All right, time to get back at it. Welcome back, everyone. And I know some of you filtering in, finishing up your coffees, so come on back in and join us. I think what's abundantly clear in the topics and the themes this morning has been the reoccurring discussion around change. It's also clear to me that it's the people here at World City in this room, and of course joining us online from different cities around the world, that are the change makers that have the possibility and the potential to make these changes a reality in our cities. The next few sessions are going to touch on innovation, disruption, and transformation. To start us off, I'm going to welcome Gary Pooni, president of the Pooni Group, to give us our first Ignite talk for the day. Gary's going to help us cast our eyes to the future by revisiting the bounce back of cities in the 1920s and 30s. Please give a warm round of applause for Gary Pooni.
Thank you, Chris. So that's a little bit about us. I couldn't hear Chris's introduction outside, but we are a firm of urban planners based in Vancouver. But it's less important to be speaking about us and the work that our firm does. It's more about all of us. What do we have in common? We're project managers for change, agents of change, as urbanists, as architects, as planners, as developers. That's a big part of what we do. So I'd like to start off my talk and mention that if change was not a good thing, we would not be doing this as a group of people. And if change was not a good thing, I would still look like this. 1989, this picture is still proudly displayed at my mom's house. I had a friend of mine tell me that if Prince and El DeBarge had a kid, that's what he would have looked like. Not bad. You're all laughing at the bow tie, probably. So agents of change. Change can be a good thing. And when it comes to cities, over the last 100 years, or the last century, there's three big events that I look to as defining our cities and our urban areas. First one was the pandemic, 1918, and the fallout from that. So I'm going to speak quickly about that. The rate of global urbanization that came after that point, and then our current economic revolution, right? The tech revolution. So pre-1920, 1918, the rise of our pandemic 100 years ago, very similar to today, excuse me. Citizens were ordered to wear masks, public venues were shut down, makeshift morgues were created everywhere. 500 million people were infected with that pandemic. 500 million people, 50 million people died. At the same time, we were coming out of the Great War, World War I, where 21.5 million people had died. We were reconstructing most of Europe at that time. Of course, people wanted to do something fun. That led to the Roaring Twenties, or what was labeled as the Roaring Twenties. People were out socializing again, the rise of swing dancing, end of Prohibition, the jazz era, 1920s, and the rise of new music, the breakdown of typical gender family norms. And for a brief moment in time, men knew how to dress for a brief moment in time. And then they forgot about it. That's one thing that didn't last. Technological innovations. There was the washing machine, the vacuum cleaner, the refrigerator. All that came out in the 1920s. Those are our big tech changes back then. The radio became our Zoom. Right? The radio is what united people. So the rise of global communication. But it also brought in this era of great change and great hardship. Kind of the reverse of what we're seeing today, where people are moving into the cities instead of moving out to the edge. So it's led to this cultural civil war. That great change led to great tension, religious tension, social tension, cultural tension, family tension. It brought a lot of conflict. So when we look back at the Roaring Twenties, and me as an urban planner, I try to look at history. And as a species, have we changed, or is our pattern still the same? So the ones that I really key in on here was the rise of the KKK from 200,000 to 2 million members in 4 years, from 1918 to 1922. and a lot of other social issues. On top of that, there was this incredible investment in a phony economic market, right? The stock market just rose exponentially, 20% a year from 1922 to 1929, and then just crashed, right? So it's artificial inflation. So that, of course, led to our terrible 30s. But we have to look back at the 20s and sort of learn some lessons from there. We had mass consumerism, tech changes, the rise of global communication, increased social regulation. Everything came after a pandemic, right? And then some hardship that led to the 30s. Does any of that look familiar to today? Right? This is a live view cam of 3 people that are sitting here right now. Right? So the second big change, very quickly, was the rate of global urbanization, not just in the United States, not just in Canada, where I'm from, but around the world. We've been on this mass urbanization since 1930, 1940. And by 2050, globally, 2 out of 3 people are going to be living in cities. In North America, it's closer to 80%. Very rapid urban change. Okay, that was number 2. Number 3 on that first list I had was our technological revolution that we were going through. Our new industrial revolution collided with this pandemic and just exacerbated and accelerated a lot of change. The change I'm referring to is not the pandemic stuff that we all did over the last 2 years. Some of you bought a Peloton, never used it. People bought a pet. Someone bought a bread maker. People learned how to shop on Amazon. Some of you read 1 book, right, over that time. It's about the change that we go through with AI and tech, metaverse. Like, where were we headed with our next industrial revolution? A lot of that has accelerated. So we have this change that comes in out of a pandemic, plus an economic revolution that we were going through. Some of the other changes that we've been looking at, here's a heat map of people who physically moved during the pandemic. In short, just over 90% of people who moved during the pandemic stayed within their metropolitan area. People are not leaving cities. They're just leaving the core and moving a little bit to the outside. That's about it, over 90%. So that's leading to great change in other parts of our urban areas. We're all very familiar with NIMBYism. So this rise of the suburbs again, not the heat map in the center of the core, but just on the edge. So we're starting to see some of that, and that cultural tension, that civic tension, and that urban tension is starting to come forward again. I think Stanley Kubrick was really onto something, right, with Space Odyssey and this nihilistic ancient feeling of NIMBYism that we've always had, even as primates. What's mine is mine, and I will defend it, and I don't want anybody else here. So all of that stuff is bubbling up again. So where do we go from here? I like to think that we are creating history. And as an urban planner, I'd like to take a look at the past to understand where we're going in the future, how we have changed as a species and how we have not. And what can I take out of it as an urban planner and start promoting some of this. So we know that there's a lot of urban change that comes out of pandemics, but also out of technological revolutions, and those 2 things have come together. So in my mind, I see a lot of things resurging again in the 2020s, but I want to be careful and mindful of some of the hardship that might come out of it. The much maligned and made fun of millennials are going to have already become an economic power, a social power, and soon to be a much bigger political power. And I'm looking to them to sort of lead us into some prosperity. So just wrapping up, I take a look at those 3 big events over the last 100 years that define our cities, and I look at those and how I think that's going to define us again over the next few decades. So if history is repeating itself, and it looks like that it is, there's also going to be great tension that we need to be mindful of. Okay? Speaking of tension, I have a very quick public service announcement to wrap up. Speaking of tension, 2.5 years ago, I had a massive heart attack. 2.5 years ago. Sudden cardiac arrest, died in front of my family, barely survived. I remember everything about dying. I didn't see anything on the other side. That's the next question. There might be something there, but I didn't see it. No flames and horns, no angels and harps. I didn't see either of that stuff. But coming back out of it, as I woke up 2 days later, remembering having died and then having woken up, I've been taking stock of my life as a change maker, like all of you. And when I look at the tension and the amount that I was working, right, 65 to 70 hours a week, which I think many of you may be doing, I would not want what I went through to happen to any of you. So speaking of great tension and the stress of the workload that we will be taking as change makers over the next decade, I just want to close off by making sure all of you take care of yourself. And if you feel something off in your health, please get checked out. Please take care of yourself. Okay? Thank you very much.